Life isn't about what happens to you. It's about how you respond to what happens to you. One of the keys to long-term successful relationships is forgiveness. And one of the keys to having a healthy life is bringing a sense of forgiveness to yourself.
Welcome to the Why Not Now show. We have Scott Galloway on the show today. Whew, he's one of the ones that I was pretty nervous because he's so smart. And I get so intimidated sometimes when people are so smart across so many different verticals. And I don't know, I work myself up. But as you will hear, super personable, definitely opinionated. And he is an NYU Stern School of Business professor. He's kind of a famous professor. He's also all over right now. If you're watching the news, if you are reading the news, he is just kind of everywhere. He's really become a thought leader, and he's in all things business, but also, life. So if you haven't heard of him before, I have a feeling you will now. He's in your awareness. So Scott Galloway. We cover a wide range of topics on the podcast and this conversation. I encourage you to stick with me because he definitely has some strong opinions, sometimes a little strong, language, angles. But if you keep an open mind and just stick with this convo, I guarantee you'll learn. You'll learn a lot. And especially toward the end, I was so appreciative because Scott really opened up about some personal things that I haven't heard him talk about too much before. This guy is one of my go-tos lately in terms of when I'm looking at news. I really respect his opinion. I think he's looking at the big picture, and he's really kind of thinking through, the impact not only of the pandemic, but what's happening with innovation. So I'm excited for you to hear this conversation. Like I said, we kind of cover a lot of different things, life, business. He started, I think, 9 different companies. So he's an entrepreneur, very, very successful. And I hope you enjoy. Scott, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today. And let's hop in, just as we typically do in the spirit of Why Not Now. Can you tell me about a time when you had a big decision to make and you had to ask yourself, why not now?
I would say the seminal moment, or the kind of why not now moment for me, was when I was in my early 30s and living in San Francisco, starting e-commerce companies, an entrepreneur, and married, and at that point in my life where I was going to start to settle into San Francisco, have kids, be in e-commerce, maybe become a venture capitalist, and I decided I didn't like my life. I didn't like San Francisco. I didn't like fog. I didn't like being married, and I left San Francisco, got divorced, resigned from all the boards I was on, and moved to New York and joined the faculty of NYU. That was kind of my why not now moment.
That's a big one. Let's dissect that a little bit. So was it a moment literally, or was this just, clearly there was probably some brewing going on, but was this an epiphany where you remember where you were and the situation exactly?
I don't think it wasn't sort of, I took a walk on the beach and something happened. It wasn't a specific moment. It was, I've been, I think, blessed. I'm an atheist, and I have a very finite sense of the nature of life. I think acutely aware of how fast time is going, and have parents who are always very action-oriented, who got on a steamship to leave the UK and Scotland, respectively. And my dad was always, his skill or superpower has always been, if things weren't going well for him, he literally would pick up and move. And thought, I want to live in New York, and I want to teach, and I just want a different life. So I think it was a gradual thing, or I don't remember a specific moment.
Interesting. And would you say you're a pretty quick decision maker in general? Like what's your process for making decisions?
So something I try to do more of as I've gotten older is I try to not to make big decisions without consulting a kitchen cabinet of people. And I advise young people that you don't want to make decisions out of emotion. And I think instincts are really powerful, and typically they're right or they have good judgment, but you want to revert to your slow thinking, and that is you want to slow down, especially around big decisions, and check in with a number of people and give them context, give them your thought process, and tell them what you're thinking and get their feedback. And I find most of the time you end up doing what you wanted to do anyways, but there is a wisdom of crowds, and to not have a kitchen cabinet of people who can provide you with advice around in and around big decisions is to ignore an incredible asset, and that is that greatness is in the agency of others, and that is, I think, great decisions are a function of hearing different viewpoints and crafting a better solution for yourself and for others. So I didn't think that way when I was younger. I made snap decisions and sort of held to it, and then fought for those decisions, either to make myself feel better or to try and demonstrate some weird sense of leadership or strength. And now I'm much better at whether it's taking a big position in a stock, approaching a difficult situation with an employee, So whether it's buying a stock or where I want to spend our summer vacation, I like to check in with people and get a variety of viewpoints. I just find there's a wisdom of crowds.
And this is such a key point, because so often I hear from listeners say they have this idea, they're ready to take action. Usually it's in the form of a career change and into entrepreneurship. And a lot of times the people surrounding them are saying, hey, no, we'd rather you kind of stay in this other zone where we're comfortable with you over here. You're doing just fine. It seems scary for their loved ones or their friends when they want to make this big change. So what I'm hearing from you with your kitchen cabinet, I'm sure there's a certain type of person that you're putting into this kind of vetting crew. What type of people are in that? Like, what would you say some of the qualities are, or the commonalities among the people that you trust to help vet your big decisions?
Well, we all have people in our life that we think just have really good judgment. And it's not necessarily people who care the most about you or the nicest people, the people you're closest to, but people who just have, in everyone's life, you think to yourself, this person just has very sound judgment and can approach a situation fairly unemotionally, very analytically. There's certain decisions, I think that, let me back up. Supposedly, there's great research from a colleague of mine at NYU, Adam Alter, about the regrets that people have at the end of their lives. And supposedly one of the biggest regrets, or not supposedly, one of the biggest regrets, is living the life that other people wanted for them as opposed to living their own life. Mm-hmm. And so I do think there's a balance between, you want to avoid a groupthink. And I think the best listeners or people who give the best advice listen and ask a lot of questions first. Why do you want to leave your job? What is it about this new opportunity that excites you? Or why do you want to move to New York? And I think people who you see as can almost do this at an arm's distance. People say, well, I get advice from my dad or my mom or my sister, and absolutely they can be part of your kitchen cabinet. But I find the people who are most effective are people who know you and respect you, but don't have an emotionally vested interest such that they can't. Parents are always probably going to tell you to take the less risky road, the place with the healthcare plan. And they're going to be, I think they're going to be a little more risk averse because they care so much about you, and the downside for them, for their kids, is much greater for them. Or the downside risk is kind of unacceptable for them. So I think that you want a variety of people with different backgrounds and people who you just think have good judgment.
Gotcha. That's such a great way to kind of delineate. There are those two different types of people. And like you said, it's not necessarily the people who care the most. So thank you for clarifying that. And as we're obviously in a really dynamic time right now, you're everywhere, Scott. I see you doing all of these news hits. I don't know how you get the amount of content out that you do, but it's incredible. When it comes to marketing, let's just narrow it down to marketing, and then let's get to like social media and regulation and stuff in a minute. But what are some of the biggest mistakes you're seeing, not only with the climate in terms of the pandemic and everything else, but in general, what are some of the biggest missteps you're seeing?
I think as it relates to the pandemic, we're a species that adapts. We learn and we respond to things based on what we know and have adapted to. And our generation has never seen up close a pandemic. The majority of the crises in our lives have been war or economic crises, and mostly economic. My first crisis, my first year out of undergrad, literally right out of undergrad, was the 87 crash at Morgan Stanley, and then the recession in the 90s, and then 9/11, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and then the recession in 2008. So there's always been, these crises have been war, economic. And as a species or as a society, our optimism has been able to carry us through these crises. And that is typically when a war's over, there's a unifying vision of the victor, and everybody sort of moves on, and there's a level of optimism. When people decide to go out and buy a car or get tickets for a Broadway show, that can bring you out of a recession. Optimism can literally solve a crisis of economic doing. The weird thing about this is that we're under the impression that our optimism and our decisions and the narrative that we craft, whether it's okay, it's time to get back to our regular lives, go out, get back to your day, go back to your job. It's time. The virus really doesn't care what our emotions are. And I think the biggest mistake we're making is that we've crafted a narrative and believe that our exceptionalism as a species and as Americans, that we can craft or change the mind of the virus. And the virus is, in fact, indifferent to our emotions. And I worry that our decision to get back to our regular life ignores the pathogen that is in Florida, infected more people than previously on record as of yesterday. Mm-hmm. And yet we seem to be focused on other things. We seem to be taking it less seriously. One might argue that, well, it's a wisdom of crowds that have just come to the conclusion that a few million people are going to die, and that is what it is, and we need to get back to our lives. But I would argue that American exceptionalism has morphed into arrogance and a dangerous comfort that believes that our optimism and our viewpoint and the narrative we want somehow impacts the pathogen, and it doesn't. So I think we're about to have a fairly significant relapse. I think we're going to create real disease and destruction that probably is unnecessary because of our arrogance around this. So I think that's a mistake. I think we have become arrogant as to the power of our optimism, and we've conflated exceptionalism with arrogance.
And what role is social playing into this? I mean, you've said that Mark Zuckerberg is possibly the most dangerous person in the world. Tell us about this. Tell us about your thoughts when it comes to social and regulation and free speech and all the things.
Sure. So with the platforms, what you have is you have a company that is run on rage, and that is we're a tribal species. And when we see something that upsets us, it engages us. Mm-hmm. So what you have is rage turns into engagement, which turns into more Nissan ads. So the underlying algorithms for Facebook and Twitter and YouTube will recognize that if you're a liberal, a video that makes Betsy DeVos look like a jerk, or if you're a conservative, something that makes Nancy Pelosi, an altered video, make her look drunk, that tickles this strange tribal sensor we have. And the algorithm recognizes that, so it will start feeding you more and more incendiary content. So we have what are probably the most profitable supernova business models in the world are fed on great rage. And we've never dealt with this before. We've dealt with it on a smaller scale with media companies that veer left or veer right, but we've never dealt with it at this scale. And we also have incredibly talented executives such as Mark Zuckerberg, who will say things like, we don't want to be an arbiter of truth. And the truth around that statement is that Facebook's actually very comfortable being an arbiter. It's the truth they have a problem with, and that is they've decided that the arbiter is money, or specifically whoever will bid to determine that their truth is our truth. So whoever's willing to pull out a credit card. I mean, to a certain extent, Mark Zuckerberg is either the cheapest whore in history, that if you have $2 or $3 and want to promote a certain ideology, he just doesn't care how damaging it is, or he's the most expensive whore. But he's a whore. And when I say that, I mean, I think sex work should be legal. I think people should be allowed to do what they want with their own bodies. But if you think of a prostitute as someone who does something that debases their own dignity and is bad for society, surely for enrichment, I mean, we have kind of ground zero with Facebook, and these companies are exceptionally dangerous. They have grown well beyond any sort of point where we typically regulate companies, where we typically break them up. Amazon has more than 100 full-time lobbyists. The owner of Amazon owns the Washington Post, owns the biggest house in DC. We just have kind of taken this key step towards tyranny, where government is no longer a countervailing force of private power. It's a co-conspirator. So I think we're in a very dangerous position. I think that every day people receive content from people they think they trust or that they know talking about the harm of vaccines. And people say, well, it's a First Amendment issue. And it's not a First Amendment issue. Anyone who, these platforms who wraps themselves in the term First Amendment, what they really mean is they want a second Gulf Stream. And that is, this isn't about free speech. These companies aren't obliged to provide free speech. And in addition, when you're talking about anti-vax viewpoint, sure, they deserve to be heard. But what Facebook does is it gives the craziest, most incendiary, most dangerous ideas, whether it's white supremacy, anti-vaxxers, it gives them more oxygen than they would get otherwise, because they create so much rage that they create more clicks and more Nissan ads. So we have the most dangerous content in the world getting more oxygen than it would get on its own organically. And this has been tremendously destructive. We also have platforms where the people who own these platforms don't want to make any incremental investments to ensure they're not weaponized by bad actors, which results in all kinds of things, including the perversion of our elections. So I would argue these are some of the most dangerous organizations in history. I think Mark Zuckerberg is a sociopath, and I think he's hired a $2 billion beard who's very likable to run around to tell people to lean in, that we need to do better, to wallpaper over the damage they're doing every day.
So other than...
That got serious. That got serious.
It did, but you know what? I'm not surprised, because I listen to you often. So other than CMOs starting to pull ad budgets in the billions, I mean, what is the answer? How does, because we've never had platforms like these before, how do we get more regulation or governance at this point? Can we even turn around?
Well, I think you make it an issue at the ballot box. We have thus far elected people who are kind of engaged in this gross idolatry of innovators that don't want to regulate these companies, are fearful of their lobbyists, don't want to take the time to understand these very complicated issues. Trump has basically turned Zuckerberg into an oligarch, and that is, Zuckerberg is using his proximity to power to make money and enrich himself in a corrupt way, which is the definition of an oligarch. So, if you think about who's at fault here, to a certain extent, these companies aren't at fault. It's citizenry who has failed to elect people with a backbone to regulate these companies and recognize their externalities, just as we recognize that car companies shouldn't be able to pour mercury into the river. We regulated them and said you have to have emission standards, and you can't pollute, you can't dump your waste in the stream behind you. We haven't done that with these firms. Thinking that CMOs are going to pull their marketing budgets from Facebook or Google, yeah, that would be nice, but the average tenure of a CMO is 19 months. This is like being second lieutenant in a platoon in Vietnam. You're kind of the first person that gets shot. It's not do you really want to take a stand and exit the platforms that are 70% of all media spend online? I mean, I think you get a lot of compliments and a lot of head nods. And then when you're not selling as much Tide or, as much Purell as your competitor online, you get fired. And people at the end of the day will be primarily focused on the economic well-being of them and their families. That's the capitalist way, and that's understandable. So to expect CMOs to play a big role in this, yeah, maybe. I would love to figure out a way to highlight which brands are advertising on Facebook, but at this point they've become utilities, and I'm not sure it's fair to expect CMOs to take a leadership role here. It's like saying, coal-fired plants are bad for the environment, so we need Procter & Gamble not to use electricity. We need you to take a stand against Ohio Power and Light. I don't even know if that's the name of the utility, and not turn on your lights, P&G. And at this point, these companies are so powerful, have such dominance in terms of your ability to drive traffic to your online efforts, which now are more important than your offline efforts in terms of the market's evaluation of where the growth needs to be, that I think it's unrealistic. I hope that it happens. I'd love to see it. But so far, you see just a lot of performative statements from CMOs who are about to retire, of becoming CMOs. Essentially, the good ones increase their spending on Facebook and Google because they're very powerful tools.
Yeah, it's just seeing.
I'm not here with a message of hope, Amy Jo. I'm not here with a message of hope.
Well, social is, I definitely was there on the front lines when things really started to take off from a social media marketing standpoint in 05, 06, 07. And the change has been fascinating in behavior. And it's not the technology, it's the humans obviously behind it on both ends. And it's something I've thought a lot about, especially after seeing Jack Dorsey make some moves on Twitter with, you wouldn't call it, basically, not allowing certain things to be said, but it's a very complex situation, obviously. So I don't know the answer is. So it sounds like the ballot box is what you're suggesting. Where do you get your news, Scott?
So I get asked that a lot, and I don't think I have any secret sources of information. I read a lot, and Twitter I think is a fantastic news feed or news source. I spend a lot of time. I watch a lot of TV. And I know how crass that sounds, but I think TV is wonderful. My kind of new Yoda is Fareed Zakaria, who hosts GPS. I try never to miss that. I find he's just an incredible blue flame thinker. And read a lot of, the same news everyone else does. What I try to do is go deep when I find something I think is really interesting or a piece of data that I think is interesting. I try to go really deep and kind of marinate it in it and really understand it. So I'll give you an example. Derek Thompson from The Atlantic, I interviewed him a couple weeks ago, and he highlighted that e-commerce really got going around 2000. And every year from 2000 on, it gained about 1 percentage point of total retail, meaning that by 2010, about 10% of all retail was being transacted through digital channels. By 2015, it was 15%. And pre-pandemic, we were at 18% of all retail going through digital channels. And then in 8 weeks post-corona, we jumped to 28%. So we had a decade and 8 weeks of progress around e-commerce. And this concept fascinates me. And what I have found in my thesis is that you can, in almost any company in any industry, take the 2 or 3 most dominant trends and extrapolate them out a decade. And that's where we are post-corona. So I think it's a very interesting exercise to say to yourself, whether you're in aerospace, whether you're in salty snacks or CPG, or you're in food and whatever industry you're in, say, okay, there are 2 obvious trends or 3 obvious trends in our industry that were taking place. Let's draw that line out 10 years. And I would bet that in most cases, that's where we are now. COVID-19 is more of an accelerant than it is a change agent. And that is, it's just pulling the future forward. I love this quote by Lenin that sometimes or often nothing happens in decades, and then decades can happen in weeks. And we're in that latter period where a decade is happening in 8 weeks. And I think it's a useful exercise. I can go through it personally. I like to think about, okay, what is my relationship like with my kids? What is my relationship with the trajectory of my relationship with my spouse? What is the trajectory of my relationship with God, or in my case, no God? And then take that out 10 years and say, all right, where would that be? Am I happy with it? How would I change my behaviors now if I didn't like where it was headed? Am I prepared for that?
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Female leaders, executives, founders, heads up, the Renegade Accelerator is open for enrollment. Renegades are at the top of their game. They're doing all the things, but usually there's something that they really want to do. What you do is you bring your why not now idea into this 8-week program. We're focused on curriculum, the Renegade mindset, collaboration, and accountability. We are all focused on growing our thought leadership, finding more time in the day by leveraging our presence. So it is present even when we are not. We are focused on optimizing our time and money and health. It is a mosaic of all types of women from different backgrounds at the top of their game, and the value exchange is exponential. Here are some why not now ideas that have come to life through Renegade. Why not now write the book? I want to get a board seat. I want to increase my speaking fee. I want to build a company. I want to pivot from corporate into entrepreneurship. I want a promotion within corporate. I want to move my brick and mortar company online so I have more freedom. I want to travel 25% of the year, but not see a dip in income. Those are a variety of why not now ideas that have been greenlit. They're done. What is your why not now idea? We're ready. If you're ready, head to renegadeaccelerator.com for more information and to apply. When you look at these big areas of focus, like you talk a lot about education and the disruption that the accelerant of COVID has or will have on online learning and healthcare. And as far as if you're an entrepreneur right now listening and you have a small business and you're just like, what the flock? What do I do? To also look at this as an opportunity, to innovate. What are some of the first questions you ask yourself?
Well, so let's talk about, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and not because I have additional skills. People conflate superior skills in entrepreneurship. And the reason I'm an entrepreneur is I don't have the skills to be successful in a big company. And I still think going to work for a big company on a risk-adjusted basis is usually a better decision. And people hate to hear that, but the best engine of economic security ever developed is the U.S. corporation. And if you have those skills, and they are skills to navigate the politics, the administration, you have the patience, if you have the ability to commute into work and put on a tie or put on a dress, and the skills to navigate a big company are not easy. And if you have them, it can be very rewarding. Most big companies, if you're there for a long time, you don't get rich, but you get rich slowly, or you get secure slowly, and that's a wonderful thing. In terms of entrepreneurship, what I found, I've started 9 companies, some of it's successful, some haven't. And I try and understand what were the driving forces, what was the signal from the noise in terms of what determined or distinguished the winners from the losers. And the only thing I could come up with was when I started the company, or specifically which part of the economic cycle. And I found that when I started companies in boom times, they almost always failed. And when I started companies in recessions, they almost always succeeded. And it makes sense because when you start a company in recession, your talent pool is much greater and it's much less expensive. Everything costs less money. Companies coming out of a recession, once you get going, are much more open to doing things differently, right? It's when things are good, there's no reason to do anything any differently. There's no reason. When you're coming out of a recession, companies feel like they've got to revisit their decisions and are much more open to new ideas and entrepreneurs. And I find small companies. And my office, or our office for our company, Prof G, which is online education, we leased office space there 15 months ago in Soho at $75 a square foot. You can go get space on the floor above me now in the same building for $25 a square foot, because everyone is leaving their office space and just has stopped paying. You can find good people again. And so I actually think right now is a terrible time to have a small business. But in about 3 to 12 months, it's going to be a great time to start a small business. So if you have a small business and you're an entrepreneur, it's not romantic. You got to go through every expense line and you got to cut your costs. You got to go through every line item and say, how do I renegotiate this or eliminate it? And that includes employee salaries. It includes how much you pay for yourself. It includes how much you spend on coffee in the office. It includes your rent, everything, and make sure that you can have the tensile strength and get to a fighting weight to get through this. Because if you get through this, on the other side, the elephants that survive the culling have more foliage to split between the surviving elephants. So I think it's a big opportunity to start a business. For companies that are small businesses that are out there, there's just no getting around it. It's not romantic. You got to cut costs and you got to get in fighting shape.
What's one thing you find yourself learning over and over, Scott?
I have a series of what I think are truths, and as I get older, almost all of them get dispelled. The one truth that sort of held the test of time, or held up to the test of time for me, is that nothing's ever as good or as bad as it seems. And you need to recognize that when you kill it, when you're doing well, when you pick a good stock, when you get promoted, when you get a great bonus, when you get, when things are going well for you in terms of a relationship standpoint, a lot of that isn't your fault. And that is a lot of it is luck, a lot of it is serendipity, and you need to have the grace to really have humility and gratitude and recognize how lucky you are, and not only appreciate it, but try and demonstrate gratitude towards others, given how lucky you are when things are going well. At the same time, when things are going poorly and you really screw up, you also got to recognize that's not entirely your fault and be less hard on yourself. Going back to that research done by Professor Adam Alter on palliative care and what people regret the most. People don't regret the bad things that have happened to them in their lives. They regret the way that they responded to them. And that is, life isn't about what happens to you. It's about how you respond to what happens to you. And that one of the keys to long-term successful relationships is forgiveness. And one of the keys to having a healthy life is bringing a sense of forgiveness to yourself. And that is, when you screw up, recognize, okay, when I'm older, I'm going to look back on this, and what I'm going to be upset about is not how I screwed this up, but I'm going to be upset at how much I beat myself up. So people wish they'd been less hard on themselves. So something that always helps me rein in my ego and also forgive myself is nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems.
And I love your algebra for happiness. For those of you listening, definitely go check it out on YouTube. It's an awesome video. Success is resilience over failure. Is that it? Is that the right equation?
Yeah, that's right. It's your ability to get beamed in the face with a baseball. I think young people are under the impression that success looks like an upward line. I think it's Adam Grant that had that initial graph. And what it is, it's just a zigzag. And success is just the ability to get, again, just beamed in the face and get up, mourn. Everyone has a right to mourn when something bad happens to them, but then
move on.
Dusting off your pants and getting up and trying again. It is really a function of, you got to connect. You just got to connect with the ball once, but expect that you're gonna strike out a few times, and also expect you're going to get hit by the ball a few times. I mean, I've had businesses go bankrupt. I've had a failed marriage. And all of those were, I lost the only person who I knew loved me at a very young age, my mom, or what I thought was a young age. And all of these, because I held on to that and I had an ability to kind of mourn and move on, was, I think, kind of the key, or one of the keys to my modest success. And that is, I've been able to kind of mourn and move on and get on and start again. And this business failed. Okay, it failed. Some of it was my fault. Some of it wasn't. I'm starting another business and go ask the same people who lost money to invest in me again. So success is resilience over failure.
And also, I really appreciate what you say about ignoring the myth of balance. I've always struggled when people use that word, and how you hustled and really, really got after it in your 20s and 30s, right? And would you attribute a lot of your success to those years of just really, really getting after it?
Yeah, so there's your trajectory, unfortunately, in your 20s and 30s kind of sets the trajectory economically for the rest of your life. It is very hard. If you have kind of a poor trajectory at the age of 35, it's going to be very difficult to recover. But at the same time, if you get the right degree, we live in a caste system, unfortunately. We like to think we live in a meritocracy. We don't. Our caste system is not dictated by your last name, but where you get your degree or your certification, if you will. And your ability to take advantage, hopefully, if you get a decent certification and really accelerate and get on the right trajectory professionally in your 20s and 30s, largely that trajectory maintains its slope for the rest of your life professionally. And that trajectory gets harder and harder to change, both to the downside and the upside, once you're into your 40s and 50s. Now, the key is, all right, well, how do I set the right trajectory? And I don't think there is balance. What I think there is trade-offs. And I want to be clear, working around the clock is not for everybody. Not everybody needs to be a millionaire. Not everybody needs to begin howling in the money storm and is totally drunk on success. And I get that. But you just have to have an honest conversation with yourself that, okay, we all hear about someone who has a great relationship with their parents, is in great shape, money just seems to rain on them, are great at what they do, have a food blog and donate time at the ASPCA. You should assume you are not that person. And the majority of people, almost actually every person I know that is in the top 10%, much less the top 1% professionally and economically, simply put, just works their ass off. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember much other than work in my 20s and 30s. I worked on Saturdays and I limited myself to just doing a few emails on Sunday. And it's not that I didn't have a nice life. I was doing interesting work and had interesting things. I got interesting opportunities to do interesting things. But, my big luxury was I had a personal trainer from 8 to 9 a.m. But then I pretty much worked till 11 or midnight every day. And I did that for 2 decades. And it comes at a cost. It cost me my hair, cost me my marriage. I think there were periods in my life where I wasn't very healthy. But I had decided very early on that I wanted economic security. I didn't grow up with money, and I decided I wanted that. And I just don't know. I don't know how to coach kids around anything other than to have an honest, sober conversation around the trade-offs that are required, distinct of what people tell you about balance and that you can have it all. You can't. You have trade-offs, and just an honest conversation around what you are really willing to sacrifice based on where you expect to be economically. And there's a grace, I think, to maintaining or creating a life where you have a low burn or a lower burn, moving to an area that's not as expensive, not being as consumptive, and ensuring you're going to see your kids play Little League. I think there's a grace and a dignity to that. But be clear, if you want to, most of the kids I coach and talk to, I'll expect to be, when I ask them how much money they expect to be making by the time they're 35 or 40, they're usually put themselves in the top 1%. I'm like, well, okay, you're going to have to work your ass off.
That's been my experience and what I've witnessed as well. Imposter syndrome. Do you find yourself ever still having an imposter syndrome?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot. And I think it's healthy. It scares me into trying to do my research. I've been doing a lot on education, the disruption in education. And I don't know a lot about it. I don't have nearly the depth. I haven't done any peer review research. I'm not an expert on it. And I'm being asked to go on CNN, PBS, and, name it, the New York Times, to talk about the oncoming disruption in education, because I have I can turn a good phrase, and I realize that I'm a bit of an imposter, that there are a lot of people out there who have much more domain expertise around education, and it makes me insecure, but it also motivates me to kind of dive in and really try and understand it. But I have imposter syndrome all the time. I worry that every day people are going to figure out that I'm a selfish, unqualified person that's just kind of stumbled into this wonderful life, and I don't deserve any of the shit that I've been afforded.
It's so fascinating. No, it's so fascinating. Don't forget, according to my mom, you're a psychic, and you're, so.
There you go.
So you're, yeah.
See a tall, dark man, one white shoe in your life, Amy.
So what's the mind, like the self-talk sound like? You're getting ready to go do a CNN hit. Saw you the other day, and you're talking about, education. You're, it's supposedly being said that you're the most, or you want to be the most influential thought leader in the history of business. I don't know exactly what that means, but so what happens when you start feeling that imposter syndrome? What goes through your mind, and then how do you, do you have things you say to yourself? How do you kind of get back into that zone of confidence and logic and also humility?
So just before I talk about my coping mechanisms and, how often I get panic attacks.
Oh, really?
They're totally unpredictable. They happen to me about once every 2 years, maybe 18 months. And they're totally random. I speak in front of audiences that range from like kind of 12 people to, I speak in, 12,000. I've spoken in front of crowds out large on several occasions. And just randomly, I'll start getting very nervous and anxious and feel my heart start like it's going to burst and start feeling faint. And the first time I had it, I didn't know what was going on. And I realized it was a panic attack. And they strike me about once every 18 or 24 months. And they're totally random. They're just not predictable. And it's usually when I'm speaking in front of not even a big crowd, but a mid-sized crowd. And I just don't know. I haven't been able to figure out why they happen. So to be clear, I am highly imperfect and get very embarrassed and get in situations where, right before I speak, I feel as if I'm going to die, and I just become totally incapable of speaking, much less presenting. Fortunately, it doesn't happen that much, but it does happen. In terms of your question around what gives me comfort, I just can't get over it. It was yesterday for me that I was in college at UCLA, going to football games, making bongs out of household items and watching the Planet of the Apes trilogy over and over. And then in an instant, I welcome my first son into the world. And then I just can't get over how fast it's going. And the source of comfort for me is I know we're all going to be dead fairly soon. And the notion that you would be afraid to do things, the notion that you would be afraid to provoke a conversation by saying something controversial. I got some hate mail last night and it really pissed me off. And then I thought, as a younger man, it would have totally rattled me. A fairly important person sent me hate mail about how inappropriate my statements were on one of my podcasts. And it's just sort of, okay, learn from it, try and understand it, if you can modify, you don't ever want to make somebody feel disenfranchised or diminished. But at the end of the day, I just know that it's going to be an instant before it's over. And so that gives me a lot of courage to try and, without sounding too romantic, pursue the truth regardless of who it offends, put myself in front of others, put myself in situations where there's a big upside, but also some downside. But it doesn't really, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but, it's all going to be over soon. So why not, order the good wine, swing a little harder.
Why not now? Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Why not now? Why not now?
Very interesting. I keep thinking about your statement earlier about COVID being an accelerator, and here we have certain things happening that would usually take a decade that are happening in 8 weeks, and then you also talked about extrapolating like your relationship with your family or with individuals, personal relationships. Do you think the same thing can be happening right now, where we're kind of we're condensing and can potentially accelerate personal relationship growth in a similar way that we're seeing some of these mega trends?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. I tried to take out 10 years my relationship or my relationships, and my atheism is a big part of who I am. And I thought, in 10 years, would I want to have some sort of relationship that's more spiritual? Do I at least want to explore or trying to open my mind to some sort of relationship with God or a God? And I've been thinking about that a lot. And I thought, by just digging into my atheism and resigning myself to that, am I giving up on something? Would I wish in 10 years that I had explored that side of things? And then I've been thinking a lot about the relationship. I have 9 and 12-year-old boys, and I think, okay, one will be entering college, one will be leaving college, hopefully, in 10 years. And I thought, well, what would I want them to have looked back on the last 10 years in terms of their relationship with me? And I just came back to this one thing of, I'd want them to think, Dad was there for us. And so I've sort of given up on this notion of quality time. And I've decided that I'm probably not going to be as economically successful as I'd hoped, or I'm just not going to have as much stuff. And stuff is important to me. Unfortunately, I get a lot of gratification from having more shit than my neighbor. It makes me feel stronger, more masculine, and more attractive to other people. But I've decided that, okay, when I think about time, when I think about kids, there really is no such thing as quality time. There's just time. And I've decided that I'm going to, I used to commute to New York. I would go up Sunday night, come back Thursday. I live in Florida, and I've decided I'm only going to do that every other week. And it's going to take away some opportunities for me. I'm going to have to resign from a couple boards that pay well and they're prestigious and make me feel important. I'm going to have to reduce my teaching. I mean, there's just a bunch of stuff that I enjoy doing and is rewarding that I'm going to have to stop doing. And I thought, well, okay, where would that take me in 10 years? And it's more stuff and more money, which is important to me. But where do I want to be in 10 years with my boys? And I'm at a point, I'm blessed for a lot of reasons, such that I can make that decision. Most people aren't in a position to make that decision or that trade-off. They have no choice. They have to go as hard as they can in terms of trying to provide economic security for their family. So I've been thinking a lot about where I want to be in 10 years with my boys. And then I think the opportunity from a relationship standpoint, going back to this decades and weeks, there's a meaningful opportunity professionally to lap the competition, Amy Jo, because a lot of people aren't at full capacity right now. They're at home, they can't work. But if you're blessed with a company or skills such that you can work at full capacity from home, you should be working at 120% capacity because there's tremendous variance in terms of ability to make progress. And if you can make progress right now while your competition is in the pits, you can lap the competition. And I've been working exceptionally hard right now such that I can work a lot less. My bet is that working really hard through this pandemic while other people are in the pits is going to dramatically expand my ability to not work. I've already decided, okay, I've been working my ass off, but I'm going to take August off. I'm going to slow down substantially the rest of the year because I'd like to think I made a lot of progress in the last 12 weeks. That's a meaningful opportunity. But I think the profound opportunity from COVID-19 is that this really is a crisis. I believe when we're on the other end of this, we'll look back and go, that was a crisis. Getting curfew alerts on your smartphone while the nation was ravaged by a virus and we weren't allowed to travel. And we were even talking about threats to our food chain and sales of guns were going up and masks, and everyone was wearing masks. And when our fourth grader graduated from the fourth grade, we did drive-by graduations because we didn't want the kids to be around each other. We're going to look back and go, wow, that was a crisis. That was almost unimaginable. And the question is, in a crisis, how do you behave? Because how you behave in a crisis or your character is a function of all your actions, but what's kind of drawn over or traced over those actions in indelible ink is how you behave in a crisis. We give medals to young men and women in uniform based on the grace and the courage and the dignity that they demonstrate during crisis when they're under fire. And if you have the opportunity to bring grace and generosity to relationships right now, I think a lot of people are struggling. I think there's what I would call an exceptional opportunity, and that is the repair and the cementing of the most important relationships in your life. And I coach a lot of young men, do you have the relationship with your parents that you want? Do you have all this kind of petty bullshit or perceived slights that gets in the way of your relationship with your siblings? Imagine you had to say goodbye to one of your parents or one of your siblings over FaceTime because they contracted COVID-19 and they were in an ICU where they didn't allow anybody. Do you have the relationship now? Is that relationship where you would want it to be? Have you made the requisite investments in your friendships? Have you brought the joy and camaraderie to them that you would want them to bring to yours? Have you let competitiveness get in the way, pettiness? Have you not made the requisite investment? The opportunity here is to make the kind of progress that typically takes decades in weeks because people remember how you behave during a crisis. So I think it's a meaningful opportunity. There's a meaningful opportunity to lap the competition professionally, but the profound opportunity is to make the investment and show generosity and love such that you can repair and cement key relationships.
Oh, that's so good. So I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you, and we can close out. What keeps you up at night? Maybe it's what you just said.
Age, just insomnia. I don't have a lot of anxiety, just insomnia. As I get older, I'm worse at sleeping. It's age.
Okay, fair enough.
And my prostate. I have to pee about 5 times a night now.
All right, there we go. That'll do it. Pirates or ninjas, Scott? Who's tougher and why?
Haven't really thought about it. I would say ninjas. I just think of the racist trope, but I think of the Japanese as just being more elegant and deadly and more about precision and technology.
And
I'll take the Japanese over, I don't know, or pirates, European cars. I don't know.
That's okay.
That'll get hate mail.
Hopefully that doesn't add to your hate mail inbox. And what's a book you've recently read that you would, you'd endorse?
I love the book Sapiens. That was super interesting. I'm rereading some books by Jeff Miller, Spent, which I think is interesting. He's a evolutionary anthropologist or social psychologist. I read Adam Alter's Irresistible because one of my sons is struggling with device addiction. But yeah, there's a ton of good stuff out there. I'm embarrassed to say this. I probably read 1 or 2 books a year. I read so much during the day that for me, relaxing is watching television. I don't read a lot of books.
Fair enough. And just to wrap up here, if you could go back to that 30-year-old self who was living in San Francisco, married, thought he wanted to go the VC route and say one thing to him, what would you say?
Everything's going to work out.
Love it. Well, I learned so much from you, Scott, it's been pretty interesting following you, especially over the last couple months. So thanks for doing what you do, and it's important work. And thank you for your time and wisdom.